Okay, well, right now as we're talking about what is an Android project and we're beginning to learn about how to build an Android project and using Android Studio, I thought it'd be helpful to take a step back so that we can understand what are the important files inside of an Android project. I mean, in other words, what are the files that are really, really important, right? And I thought the best way to demonstrate this is by building a minimal project. So what I mean by minimal is, what is an Android project that contains the fewest number of files possible that allows us to build something that could be called an Android app. So towards that end, I am going to show you how to build a relatively small, a very small project. And you'll notice that I have this software right here, Sublime Text open. It's really just a souped up text editor. It doesn't have a whole lot of fanciness to it. The one thing that it does have that I'm going to be using is this folder structure right here. And that's a good segue into the first point I want to make, is that Android projects, like other Java projects, which I know you're already familiar with, rely on folder structure a whole heck of a lot. And the folder structure of your app in many ways determines how the thing gets built. So what we're going to do is I'm going to start from the top layer, the top level folder of this project, and kind of work my way down to the lowest level of the folder and then work my way back up again. And I'll try and make it clear what I'm doing as I go along. Okay, so as you notice, I've created a folder called Minimal Project. So that's my project name, Minimal Project. Then inside of Minimal Project, I'm going to create a new folder. And I'm going to name this folder App. Now, I could have named it many other different things. This is one of the very few files and folders in the project that could be named anything. In this case, I'm going to name it App because that just makes it easier for everybody. So the App folder, this folder is going to contain the build files, the tests, and the source code, plus the build configuration file for a module. Now, what do I mean when I use the word module? Well, an Android Studio project can have one to many modules. And a module you can think of these modules as components. A module can be something that builds an app. It can build a library. You can actually build two apps out of the same project. So you might have two modules, each one builds an app, and then they all rely on a third module, which is a library. It allows you to be really quite sophisticated in how you reuse code across several different apps in your system. In this case, we're only going to build one module, and it's going to be the app module, and all the code's going to be in there. So we have one folder called app. The next folder is going to be SRC, or source. So this folder contains our source code, as you can probably guess. It also contains our tests. We're going to end up talking a little bit about testing later on in the quarter, but for now, we're only going to talk about the code folder, the code files, which in this folder is called main. Main. So the source folder will hold, among other folders, a folder called main. And main is going to hold all of the code files, resources, and the manifest that actually builds the app module. Now, before I go on, there are two very, very important files that the main folder holds. There is what's called the Android manifest, and the second is your main activity, at least one activity. So, an important point to stop on if on a quiz, for example, I ask you, what are the two files, the two absolutely bare minimum required files that make up an Android Studio? Not build an Android Studio or an Android project, but make an Android app. The answer to that is going to be the Android manifest and at least one activity. So again, most important files for an app, not building the app, but for the app itself are 1, the Android manifest, and 2, your code files. So the first thing we're going to build is our code file or activity. We're going to build, add a Java folder. That's where our Java code is going to go into. So then we're going to create the package structure. Again, this is Java, so we have to create a package structure for our code. My package is called example. Then I'm going to create one file in here called main activity.java. Next week, we're going to talk quite a lot about activities. Suffice it to say for now that an activity is the fundamental host class for all of your app's user interface. And activities also have to be the entry point into your app. When Android launches your app, it is going to launch your app into an activity. You'll also notice that the activity, this main activity that I've described here, it is a subclass of our activity class. In other words, what I'm saying is that the main activity that you define in your app has to inherit from the android.app.activity class. That's because Android is going to be looking for an activity type object to instantiate when it starts your app. Now, the activity class has a bunch of methods that you can override, like other parent classes that you're probably familiar with in Java programming. In that case of activity, many of these methods correspond to what are called activity lifecycle events. We're going to talk more about this next week, but basically what I mean by that is that these methods correspond to certain events that arise or that are called upon an activity instance over the course of its lifetime, from being created to becoming visible to the user to moving to the backstack and navigation to eventually being destroyed. Among the most important of these methods, and the one that we're going to be looking at right now, is the onCreate method. So this corresponds to the onCreate event in an activity's lifecycle. And this method gets called shortly after an instance of the class is created and some memory is allocated to it. This method tends to be the best place for you to add your code that builds the user interface for your app. And you'll notice that's exactly what we're doing here. So first line, we call the onCreate method of the parent class. So we call activity.onCreate. That just allows the activity class to do further setup tasks that require to be done in that code. You'll notice that we have created a single user interface widget, a text view. It's basically a label. We've added some code to the label. And then we've called activity.setContentView, the setContentView method, that then puts this label into our user interface. I mean, essentially, it packs the user interface element into our user interface. It's a really quick and dirty way for us to add UI pieces to our activity. So here's, of course, one of the two most important files, which is the activity file, which is the entry point for our app. The next really, really important file that you should be aware of that creates an Android app is the manifest. Now, the Android manifest, this is one of the files that has to be named exactly a specific way. It must be capital A, Android, capital M, manifest.xml. Cannot be named anything else. Now, the Android manifest file is the file that tells Android what is contained inside of the app. It declares a bunch of really important things. So it declares all of the activities, services, if your app includes services, broadcast receivers, content providers that are available in the app. Of course, I'm not going to talk about services, broadcast receivers, or content providers. For now, just keep in mind that those are other things that you can put into an app. Right now, we're just going to talk about activities. So you'll notice that this particular app, or this manifest, declares that the name of our application is minimal, that it has a package that it uses, namespace, com.example. We've declared a single activity, main.activity. So that's corresponds to the code that we wrote earlier. And then here you'll notice that we've got these two child elements, this child element intent filter that has two children inside of it. And this is really important. There's this concept in Android called an intent. Again, this is something we're going to talk about at more length next week when we start talking about activities and intents. But these intents, the short version is that intents are the mechanism that you use to launch an activity. And it's also how you pass messages between activities, the fundamental method by which technique through which you pass messages between activities. Now you'll notice that there are two actions that we've told Android that this activity can have, two reasons that an intent can come to this activity. One is that we've said this is a main activity. That means that you can launch this app from the home screen, that this is the entry point, this is an entry point into our app. The other thing we've just declared is that this is a launcher. So this means that this is something that the Android app can show, or that the Android device rather can launch from the app launcher in its user interface. It can also be something that is tied to your home screen. The next file we're going to talk about, the next series of files are actually build configuration files. So Android uses a build system called Gradle. And your Android app needs, well, at minimum, it needs about 3 Gradle files to build. And actually, there's 3 Gradle files, and then there's a wrapper, and there's a whole bunch of other things we're going to talk about in a few minutes. But for right now, we're just going to concern ourselves with these three build configuration files. So the first one is called build.gradle. It has to be called build.gradle. It cannot be called anything else. And this is the build file that is going to build this module right here. So you'll notice that this configuration file tells us a couple things. One is it tells Gradle to apply the com.android.application plugin. So one of the reasons why we use Gradle to build Android apps is because Gradle is extensible. You can build plugins for Gradle that allow you to build extra things using Gradle. And Google has decided that one of the ways that they're going to build Android apps is by creating the Android application plugin for Gradle. The next thing that this configuration file tells us is that we're targeting a specific version of Android. So right now we're targeting API level 23. That's what this means. To those of you who haven't memorized API levels, API level 23 happens to correspond to Android Marshmallow. So right now, this app is designed to run on Marshmallow and older devices. And then lastly, what this does is it tells Gradle that it needs to use the version of the Android application plugin 28.0.3. So because this com.android application, because this plugin is itself a project that is built, it is code that is built, it has versions too. And so we are telling Gradle, okay, in order to build this app correctly, you have to be using this version of the build tools. You'll notice as you do a lot of work with Android that making sure that the versions of your build tools that you are using are correct, particularly, and the same, particularly when you start sharing your code with others. Now, if you're looking at this code and you're wondering like, oh geez, what language is this that is written in? This is a language called Groovy. You don't terribly need to know a lot about Groovy to work with Android. The only time you really need to know anything special about Groovy is if you decide to do some sort of special customization of your build files, which if you become professional Android developers, you very likely will need to do. But for the most part, Android Studio does a really good job of handling all the Groovy syntax for you. And of course, if you make a mistake in Groovy syntax, it'll typically tell you. So now the next build file we need to add, and this is where it gets confusing, is also called build.gradle. So there are two files called build.gradle. One which has to go in each module, and then another that's at the project level. Now, the project level build.gradle file defines a whole bunch of settings for all of the modules in the project. In this case, it says that when resolving dependencies, so if you add an external library to your app, like Google Maps or something Facebook, I don't know, the cloud tools for Android, GMS Core, Firebase, whatever, that if you're going to add one of these libraries into your app, that when Gradle needs to download those libraries and build them into your app, it tells Gradle to look at the Google version of the Maven repository and the JCenter repository. The next thing it says, oh, while we're talking about libraries, hey, I actually have a library I need you to download, and that happens to be the Android build tools, right? So basically, if you need to resolve my dependencies, here's where you need to look, and here is the first dependency I need you to resolve. Now, you'll notice that this next block right here isn't totally necessary for every project, although you'll see most projects have this now. Basically, it just says for every module in this project, you need to be looking for at the Google Maven repository and JCenter. And then last right here, this block, the task block, this tells Gradle to delete all the build files when the project is built and the code is run. And of course, unless you are using Instant Run or something like that. This configuration isn't necessary, but it's a good idea to keep. I mean, it allows Gradle to do a clean build of your app, right? Now, there's one more Gradle file we need to add. This one is called settings.gradle. Which is kind of weird and doesn't make a lot of sense, because you'd think something called Gradle.settings is a whole bunch of settings that you're setting for Gradle, but it's not. And it's not that at all. Should actually be called like modules.gradle. Why? Because the settings.gradle file, it declares all of the modules in your project. So again, in our previous example, if you had 2 or 3 modules in your project, they would all be listed right here on this include line. We only have 1 module, so we only have 1 item right after include. So now we're going to go ahead and save everything, right? At this point, I could build this project using just some command line tools. You can use the ADB command line tools, the Android build tools directly from the command line. This is something that gets downloaded when you update the SDK version, the Android SDK with Android Studio. Now, the truth is, getting that set up is a royal pain in the butt. And furthermore, there's something that Android Studio gives you in particular that I want to talk about a bit. So in this case, I'm going to make our lives easier, and I'm going to open up this project in Android Studio for the next couple of steps. So let's go ahead and bring up Android Studio. We're going to open an existing Android Studio project. Okay, here. And there you'll see that it recognizes that minimal project is a Gradle project. It's an Android Studio project, so we're going to open it. So we're going to notice it's going to come up. So now this is what's really important. I want to stop on this. Android Studio is saying like, hey, I can't find a Gradle wrapper in your project. What's up? And the Gradle wrapper is really important. This is why I opened the project in Android Studio to build it. Someone say yes. Okay, please do that. I'm going to close my tip of the day. So you're going to notice that when I said yes to that, Android Studio is going to add a whole bunch of new files to this project. Some of the stuff that's going to add .iml files, .idea folder. Let's see if we can find that here. Is that right? There we go. Like this folder, don't really need that guy. It's just stuff that Android Studio needs to do its thing. We have this file right here. This just tells Android Studio where my copy of Gradle, my local copy of Gradle is. That's fine. But then there's this, and there's two weird Gradle folders. This one is basically a series of build outputs. This one actually has what's called the Gradle wrapper. And this, Gradle W and Gradle U.bat, these are 2 scripts that execute the Gradle wrapper. So what's really important about here? Well, these 2 Gradle W executables in the Gradle folder allow us to use the Gradle wrapper, allow us to invoke it. And this helps Gradle to actually build our project. By having the wrapper included in our app project, we are guaranteed to make sure that anyone who downloads our project and then builds it is going to use the exact same Gradle build tools and build execution scripts that we used when we built it. So it really is a very, very important thing to have if you're going to be sharing your code or if you want any kind of consistency. So when you go to submit your homework, you'll notice that, for example, in like homework number 1, I've asked you to submit a clean homework, or a clean project, rather, a project that has only the required files for the project, no junk. So a clean project means a project that only includes the major artifacts that I've spent time describing. So all of your Java source codes, any resource files, which we didn't talk much about, but we'll be looking at that a little bit next week. All your tests, the Android manifest. So again, Android manifest, really, really important. All your build.gradle files, your settings.gradle file, the Gradle folder with the Gradle wrap, with the Gradle wrapper, both your Gradle W and Gradle W.bat files. So those are the only files that your project should include. Everything else in the project is really just stuff that Android Studio needs to run this project on your specific computer, or my computer in this particular case. So that includes this .gradle folder, this .idea folder, this local.properties, anything that is .iml. All these things are junk. Make sure they are not in your project when you submit it to GitHub. Okay, so now I've done this process of showing you minimal project, and now the moment of truth arrives. Let's see if we can get this puppy to run. We have our connected device. Bring that up. Put you over here. Put you up. No, where'd you go? Okay. We're gonna hit OK. And it's going to build. It's building. It's building. It's still building. Oh, how it is building. If you're thinking this is the nerve-wracking part about creating a video, you would be correct. Ooh, this is good. This is good. And oh, we're so close. Let's try this again. Yeah. Okay. And there we go. Yay, success. We've got our minimal app with the words hello world and a label there in the main part of the user interface. As you will notice, sometimes when you run your project, it doesn't always work the first time. And you may feel crazy for doing it, but sometimes you just have to stop the build attempt, force close everything, and try over again because Android Studio. So this video has been a demonstration of what makes a minimal project that can be built into an Android app. I've shown you the two minimum files that make up an APK or an Android app, that is your Java, your activity, which is the entry point for your app, plus your Android manifest. And then I've discussed with you the build configuration files that Gradle needs in order to be able to build your app. So if you want to think about the stuff that makes your app as being in one of two categories, right? There is the stuff that gets built into your app, and then there's the stuff that builds your app. Generally speaking, when you put together a project, that's the sort of stuff you're going to see in your project. So I hope that this video has been helpful. I'm going to try to continue to make more videos as the quarter goes on, and I will see you in class.